So, hey, welcome to the May edition of Marketo Engage Champion Office Hours. So I'm Chris Willis. I'll be your moderator for today. Um, and we've got four very capable expert champions on the call that are here to answer a lot of the hard questions that you've asked. If additionally, if you have questions that you're thinking about in real time, feel free to bring them up in the chat as well. So we'll do kind of a short slide deck, and then we'll kind of kick this off to our panel for the reason that you're here today, which is to learn something new, get some of your problems solved with Marketo. So we'll talk about some introductions, some house rules, and then I'll talk about some housekeeping items, and then we'll introduce our panelists and then get to your questions. So one thing to note is, I don't know if you noticed that the BV emails that are going out for the mugs are going to spam. So I know this is something that's being worked through, but you do want to check with your your IT groups and your ISPs and just make sure that you're whitelisting the emails that are going out for the Marketo user group. If you've seen an impact to whether you're getting those emails or not. So for house rules, so in order that we make sure that we're a user-focused organization, this is a kind of a safe place for members of the Marketo Engage community to learn, network, and obviously today problem solve together. In order to accomplish those goals, we need to follow these rules. So one is no self-promotion. So this is a kind of a neutral space for us to talk about leveraging Marketo Engage. Please don't contact people outside the user group without their consent. Consent is a big thing. None of us want to be spammed. We care a lot about privacy. And then if a mug member shares their use case at the user group, please don't share that information without their consent. As we kind of mentioned within my team, this is Vegas rules. What's said on user group stays on user group. All right. And then for housekeeping, so this meeting will be recorded and will be posted at mugs.marketo.com. And we will provide resources after the event, including the recording. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our champion panel. So I'm Chris, your moderator. I'm Global Marketing Operations Manager at Trimble Construction. And I'm a recent champion, class of 2021. Amanda, do you want to go next? I'll just go from left to right.
Sounds good. Hi, guys. I'm Amanda Thomas. I am a marketing ops consultant at Atumos. I've been in Marketo over 7 years using the tool, and I'm a 5-time Marketo champion.
Thanks. Helen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Helen Abramova. I'm a marketing technology lead at Verizon Business Group. I've been using Marketo about 7 years as Amanda, and I'm just 4 times champion and excited to be here.
Thanks. Jenny.
Hi, Jenny Robertson. I head up the technology team at Annuitas. This is my 8th time being a champion. I was lucky. I worked for a company that adopted Marketo in the really early ages. And outside of Marketo and work, I'm also a boy mom. I have 2 boys, one of which his last day of kindergarten is today.
Wow. Nice. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm sad. He's growing up.
Yeah, and last but not least, Natalie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Kramer. I'm the Marketing Automation Manager at McGraw-Hill Higher Education. I've been using Marketo for almost 6 years now, and I'm a 3-time Marketo champion. So super happy to be here today.
Thank you. So I'm going to stop my screen share. So we may have some of our champions that may do some screen sharing when the use case, if the use case demands it. So I'm just going to go through the questions. So the first question, somewhat of a dual question. There were a couple of questions that were asked about GDPR and best practices for like double opt-in. Kind of overall kind of meets kind of that question about how do we deal with like email consent, email opt-in, data privacy, and such. So how would you, who would like to take that on?
I can start, and if someone wants to chime in, absolutely. So the major strategy around GDPR is to talk to your legal team, because it's extremely important to be aligned, because there is no clear guidelines given by a GDPR authority. It's just like set of presumptions and kind of like rules that you have to follow, but how those rules are applied is like truly very wide, broad area for any kind of you know, what kind of risk you want to take, how you want to play it out in your system. So the biggest challenge is like to keep this very clean separation between international, in terms of like GDPR related countries, and the US, because it's kind of opposite as on today. And it's important to have this notion of like, in GDPR sphere, it's no longer like binary. It's not like subscribed or unsubscribed, right? You need to have this kind of like something in between, something that you need to have, like when you just like have a record and you have like no idea where this record, like what the status is. And then you have expressed consent. And then you have a situation with, I believe it's 4 countries or 3 countries right now, where you have double opt-in. So you need to have something in between, like single opt-in and then double opt-in. So like having this idea of, and like formal representation of different types of levels of consent in your system, and all kind of data management practices and rules that will be like sending operational email to confirm this second double opt-in, and keeping it all on track. That's kind of like a very short answer. I do believe there are lots of good guidelines and recommendations out there by many different sources. So please check this out, but go to talk to legal first. That's kind of where we started, we ending up.
Thank you. Jenny, would you
I
like
can
to
add a little bit to that. Yeah, I completely agree with the talk to legal, because we've implemented in my company a lot of different processes for GDPR and CASL over the years. And you'd be surprised, every company's legal team interprets it differently. We've even, you know, there's some best practices we consider for it that we've had companies, you know, not necessarily agree, their legal teams agree with. Things like don't pre-check your opt-in checkbox. We had one client who actually, their legal team decided that was okay. So definitely I agree with the talk to your legal team, because they all translate it differently. But some very basic things to keep in mind: make sure you have that opt-in checkbox. My opinion, make sure you don't pre-fill it, right? When somebody fills it out, capture the date. You always want to capture the date of when somebody's opting in. And also when people unsubscribe, you need to make sure you're capturing that date and, you know, updating your opt-in flows accordingly for that too, so that people can re-opt in. Things like that, you definitely want to make sure you're watching out for, because every legal team looks at those things differently. But I also usually recommend, you know, even in the US, right, if we're not as strict, but it's still a good practice to do those things here, because guess what, eventually we will be strict. So trying to make that as global as possible, even though it's not necessary, is a really, really good practice. So I think that's about all I'd have to add.
I have one more thing to add on that too, is like the request to remove data. So under some of these laws, they can request that their data is actually removed. To have a process in place, whether that's like a, you know, an email address that distributes to your IT team and your marketing team and your sales ops team, definitely have some kind of process in place for that removal part. But yeah, of course, they all have different interpretations of it, but that is still a thing. So have a process for it.
Oh, definitely. So the next question, for a lot of our orgs, like we have concerns about like performance, and smart lists, um, and are a really huge part of that. And so we have a question about like, how do we optimize our Marketo smart lists and our Marketo smart campaigns for performance? Natalie, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So this is a great question. There's a lot of different things at play with Smart Campaign and Smart List performance. But as you're building it out, always start with like the filter at the top that's going to cut it down the most. So if you have like a marketable filter or segmentation or something like that, that can be a really good place to start. If there's really specific criteria, if it's a state or something that's kind of gonna, or an industry or something that's going to drill down really fast, have those at the top. That's really going to cut down the processing that Marketo takes. If it's not looking at everyone in the database and it can look at a very specific group of people, that's going to help a lot. Excuse me. And then also using is instead of contains is another huge one. If you're looking at contains, Marketo's having again to look at all of those records and see if it contains that. Rather, if it is, it's going to drill down a lot faster. So simple things like that with how you kind of set up the criteria of your list can make a huge difference. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I can add a little bit.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Sorry. Similar to the use is instead of contains, also starts with performs better instead of contains. So if you can avoid contains by using starts with, if is an option, I'd try that next. I'd also recommend not daisy chaining or nesting your smart list. So if you have a smart list that references another smart list that references another smart list, that's a really easy way to slow processing times, and that's something to definitely avoid. And then when referencing the activity log in a smart list, like if a data value change or a form fill or something like that, if you can restrict the date of the activity, the less time you look back, the faster it will process versus having to go through the whole activity log and look at all time. Some things like that can help as well.
I wanted to mention negative filters. They perform not very well, and I would avoid anytime I could. And all kind of constraints other than dates that kind of like limiting, but like as soon as you're starting like adding those additional constraints on filters, that can impact the performance. And another thing that I want to say that I've seen in my experience situations where the logic is becoming so complex, it's just like failing, and what you see is just like it's not what you are expected to see. So I would always recommend to double check and like spot check what you've been doing and like looking what you are filtering out, and consider like splitting the lists and like making them, or smart campaigns, making them simpler.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing too. Helen made me think of something else. If you have a lot of different filters and they're new, if you're not used to using them or using them combined. Sorry, my voice is going out today. This is not good timing. Test things one at a time, right? So instead of just adding 10 filters and then running it and thinking like, that's my list, test the first couple, add another one, see how your numbers change, and kind of monitor it that way. I know, we have smart lists that have 20 different filters in them. So it's good to kind of test the components separately too.
Great. So let me jump to kind of a process question. For like folks that are on the call that are just maybe like onboarding with Marketo, or have just started, like their companies may have just started using Marketo in like recently in like the last couple of months. So there's a question about like, what's your top recommendation for like either for teams that are new to Marketo, and then those teams are obviously looking for best practices and ways to get some quick wins. So how would you advise those teams to kind of leverage to be able to leverage Marketo as a new organization with Adobe?
So many opinions. So many, yeah, Marketo is definitely opening up like a whole world. And if it's especially if it's your first like marketing automation system that you have in place, I would definitely start always with life cycle processing. So actually getting people stamped to track the buyer stage and the buyer journey. Because this is going to provide that ROI. Like we have gotten this many MQLs out of, using this marketing automation platform. And then sourcing. I think people think that they just fill out one, person source field and hopefully it's okay, or just use acquisition program and hopefully that's okay. But I think tracking source kind of proves the value to your marketing team that's running campaigns, so whether that's like paid ad campaigns, webinars. It obviously makes them, buy in to using this platform. And then lifecycle proves like the ROI, the actual like cost of what you're paying for the platform. Those are my opinion.
I think even taking it back a step too, if someone's new to Marketo, I think getting your team paid training. I know people kind of go through onboarding and it's just like, okay, we're onboarded, let's start sending emails. But I think making sure people understand how Marketo works and then like taking it a level deeper, whether it's through a consultant or, paid services or whatever it is, making sure that you have the right thing set up. If you're brand new to marketing automation, there's a lot of stuff to figure out, but just understanding like what's available in Marketo and the best ways to use it. Otherwise, I like to call it wild, wild west Marketo, right? People start going rogue and doing their own things and they don't know any better, so kind of setting the groundwork up front can make a huge difference.
I would suggest to just like plunge into a specific area. For example, you are like setting up scoring, or you are watching how data is flowing. So like the more kind of like what's coming in and what's coming out and how it's getting transformed, and like go into like and do this kind of investigative work really helps to understand and like to get the whole scale of things. And like you really need to like hit the bottom where like you're just like getting really tired and like really like, but you need to get to the point where you're like, okay, I understand like this particular part, how it works, and like I totally got it and I can talk to that in length. So I think this kind of like, and then like next time you're starting like looking into like another area and like going into details, and until you are getting all the answers that you are like coming up with, like not just like don't let it go until you got it.
And I think
Yeah, and I'd add, I'm sorry. I'd add for teams new to Marketo, there are so many amazing free resources. The community is amazing. The university is amazing. The mug community is amazing. So you could self-learn a ton in Marketo, and the documentation is really good, really specific. It's just great. So for teams new, there is a lot available for free as well in the community. Some you can access before you even, have Marketo. So definitely you can prepare that way as well. And then just to add to what all the other ladies said, I think making sure you're thinking about that lead management framework and what it looks like, the scoring, the life cycle model, all of that, because it is so tempting and easy to get your access and start sending emails, because it is easy. It's Marketo and you can do that. But make sure you don't lose sight of that framework that's going to support your KPIs and structure going forward, because it's really easy to miss that if you just hit the ground running sending emails.
And I think something to add on to like what Natalie was saying too about like training, and if it's just like completely brand new to your company, you're like a smaller company and you're just starting out, is organizing that like operations team, right? So who will own what? Like will there be campaign managers sending out emails? Like, is there going to be someone who can implement that framework of like life cycle? It's definitely, mapping out your team and who will own what, I think will help you organize and make sure that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish using the platform.
Yep. One thing, these were awesome, like answers. Like I definitely like second that, like that having lifecycle operations, having those processes in place is key to, especially selling the success of Marketo to, especially up to your executives. One thing I would add to this is for like your basic marketers that are in the system sending emails, to try to templatize your programmatics that they would be operationalizing, because that will protect you from like the org being the wild, wild west. So once you have your lead scoring model in place, making sure that your marketers have templatized methods to execute, so that you don't have like, 31 flavors of Marketo in your system when you're running campaigns. So I'll go to the next question. So there's a question about the latest in ABM best practices. I think this is always near and dear, especially to the B2B marketers in the room. So what are your thoughts on ABM and how to do it well?
I think it's actually like we've been hearing about ABM for forever, probably, right? So I think what is coming into kind of like broader awareness is the situation that like you need to have data, and like until you have the very good actionable data, you probably won't be able to achieve a lot. And the second piece of it is like, well, it's coming back to strategy. Like there is no ABM without a like very clear strategy, who you're going for and how you're gonna engage those accounts, and how how it is different from like regular dimension. Because I think like lots of kind of like question like, but if you are trying to have the volume, like it's not ABM. Like you really have to provide this kind of very personal, very tailored, very like account related specific messaging, and that is like very hard to do. It's very hard to like just like to plan to have some kind of ABM, but implement this messaging that resonates, that is applicable, and like have this very specific account journey, right? Like this is very different from like what people or companies used to do. So I would just like put it out there, like data and strategy. That's what it goes back to. Anyone wants to?
Anybody else?
I can add one thing we've been doing outside of Marketo that I'm excited to bring into Marketo with ABM is we've always looked at accounts when we have multiple people on account engaging. To us, that means something, right? And that's a big part of ABM. You want to see the full picture. And so we've always done some external work in order to get that visibility and score off of it and take action off of it. But with the latest Marketo product release this month, we're seeing now Marketo ABM has that functionality where you can run a smart list query to say, hey, there's more than one person on this account. Have they reached the stage or have they done these other things? So I'm super excited because we've been doing that externally to Marketo. But after this May, we're going to be able to start using Marketo to do it. So I think, and just to add, like Marketo ABM, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. And like as it's evolving, I know I'm excited about it and seeing how we can use it.
Great. We'll go to the next question. So what's a good way, like using Marketo logic to clean up like bad records in your database, like specifically like hard bounces, and this particular person asked this question, can't remove them from the CRM. So they want to be able to remove like records from Marketo, but their CRM, like the records are locked. What would be your recommendations to them?
I would say for my end, we've had that, and you can remove records from Marketo only, but you have to be careful because if you remove a record from Marketo and you leave it in CRM and it later gets updated or converted to, if it's a lead, it gets converted, it can come back into Marketo again. So if you're going to be removing records from just Marketo, I'd make sure you have some kind of process with Salesforce to make sure that record doesn't come back in if you need to leave it there. You can use a custom sync filter, and you can set this custom sync filter to a value so that it, breaks that connection and Marketo can no longer see the Salesforce record, and then you're free to delete it out of Marketo. You can use a profile and field to kind of accomplish that same thing, but I would just make sure to be thinking about the impact it has when you delete it in one record versus the other, and how it can sync back over upon updates or other interactions that happen in the future.
So without putting Natalie at the spotlight, but I believe, was it a presentation recently around that? No?
For me,
Yes.
I don't think I did a presentation on that, but I think just the side of like the email bounce cleanup and maintenance, I think, and I know all of us probably do something similar. You have some smart campaigns watching for certain behavior for email bounces. So if you have soft bounces within a certain period of time, you might want to flag those people as invalid, things like that. I know we have a couple of different things going on, like we alert our reps if someone's bouncing, maybe their email address has changed, that email address needs to be updated. That can be a really good thing to look for. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of dirty data that nobody knows about. I know we're going through a huge cleanup process right now around that. Even alerting them in real time, they're not doing much with it. So I think you're kind of having processes in place to monitor and keep Marketo updated so that you're not hitting those people over and over again.
I also think that you need to put something in place if someone is not responding for a while and there is no activity you can track. You might want to suppress those records because it's probably either your messaging is not resonating or this is just like obsolete records and they are no longer valid, even though you cannot kind of like validate or non-validate them. And like the whole idea that like 20% of your database a year becomes obsolete, that's kind of like we just have to admit that people do leave companies and the data is becoming no longer valid. And also what I would love to mention is there are so many additional tools that you can utilize, lots of them. And like, if you can use it, absolutely, please use to the full extent. If you cannot, please check this deliverability metrics and like bounces and like all kinds of system responses that you're getting in Marketo. Just like go into those system fields and check like email invalid reason, like dive into that. What kind of bounce? Because there are like different types of bounces, categories of bounces, and they all can be treated like slightly different or in a specific way. So go into all that, and that would help you to keep it all clean and safe.
Right.
Yeah, one more thing to add that I actually just thought of while you were talking is that if you are going to remove bad data like that from your database, also keep in mind their history. If they've interacted or engaged with marketing and created an opportunity, but then had a job transition, think about the timing of when you want to remove them from your database, because that could impact your ROI reporting and other things. Obviously, if somebody, becomes invalid and they've never really contributed to anything, maybe it's not as big a deal, but also think about those kinds of considerations before you clean your database.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about emails. There's a question about like, how do you, like, as a best practice, how do you improve your click-through rates, your reduce your bounce rates and your unsubscribe rates in your emails? And I'd probably also add your open rates. So what are some kind of tips and tricks that you guys have used to get your email kind of engagement up?
Testing. It's the biggest thing, I think. Running tests on subject line for open rates, where your CTA button is in your email for like click rates, what that CTA button says, and keeping a testing log. I think that's like really important too, to know like I tested this at Q3 2020, and that kind of like fends off like people that are trying to test things unnecessarily. You can say I tested this and this was the result, but it also reminds you to retest things, right? Like we tested that and we know that putting the name in the subject line is going to get more opens. But that was like last year. Should we test that again? It kind of like keeps you on your toes for testing. But yeah, that's my like response. I guess it's not a actual tip. I would say definitely have, I find it useful from testing that if you have the CTA button in your actual banner image, you're going to get more clicks. And I think at the end of the day, you want to make sure that they're making it all the way through. So like do a lot of reporting on who actually filled out that form after they clicked. You know, if you have some analytics to pull in, if you're using a tool to host your content and you can say they spent this much time on the page, that's way more valuable than looking at the number of opens and clicks.
I would also say another thing that's interesting to test with the open rate is who your emails are coming from. I think a lot of people just default to what they've always done. We've done a lot of testing with that over the years and seeing, you know, like different people testing from a person versus a company. Different people have different responses, like someone's sales rep that they know is going to be different than, you know, some generic person within the marketing team. So really taking those things into consideration and the relationship your customer has with your company. You know, if there's certain names that are going to be resonate more with them, you could definitely look into tapping into that too. That's a great thing to test.
I would also suggest treating all metrics slightly like separately, because I do believe that deliverability, like how much are delivered, is one metric. Open rate is like totally different one, and click is like another one that depends on open, but not necessarily. So kind of like having this perspective and thinking through what exactly is impacted by that particular metric, because delivery rate is kind of like overarching, that is both like technical and also like engagement level. And we know that our IPS is getting like smarter and smarter, right? And like it's not just like sending the right email, and like if there are less and less engagement points, our delivery will suffer. And like that is like really hard to beat. Like you cannot like, you know, trick the system, because it will look not only that it's the right sender and IP reputation and everything, but there is like results of this engagement should be there. So like having this perspective and understanding that we are working with very complex environment, and like systems are getting smarter, and we have to be smarter as well.
Right. So I got some questions about like, I think this is one is a little near and dear to my heart because I've been through this exercise. So tips on like updating people who are missing acquisition programs, doing kind of that exercise where you're trying to clean up acquisition programs, clean up lead sources. What tips can you provide us to do that effectively and also to do it correctly?
I think for acquisition programs, there's a couple different ways you could do it. You know, you run a smart list to see who's missing the acquisition program, then you have your audience who needs it. You can look at the standard Marketo sourcing fields. There is like original source type, original source info, maybe another source type and info field. So you could look at the values in those fields to help you determine what the acquisition program can be. And that can help you determine a lot of your list possibly. And if it does, you can either update it via Smart Campaign or list uploads. You have to be careful updating fields via list uploads, fields like that, because if you have duplicates, you know, Marketo is going to match to the last updated record. So I'm always wary of uploading lists for things like that. I make sure, depending on the list, that there's not a lot of duplicates and things, so I'm updating the right record. But that's one way you could start. If you have, you know, depending on how large your database is, if you have, you know, a certain subset of programs that you know are the ones that possibly these people came in on, and you can identify which ones they came from using Smart Campaigns to update is always nice. I actually love updating things over Smart Campaigns instead of list uploads when possible, because it gives you a history of what you did. So if you're like, okay, these 100 people belong to this acquisition program and you use a Smart Campaign to do it, and then 6 months later you realize you were wrong, it's easy to see what you did so you can fix it later. Of course, list upload, if you have a large amount of people, it's faster, better processing time, but always think through those things when you're updating those kinds of fields. Same thing goes for sourcing. You can look at those fields to see sourcing. You can run smart lists to see when person was created. You can filter on source type and form name and list name and other things, so that can help you determine those factors as well.
I think that was a pretty
That was
expansive answer. So I think I have nothing to add. That was perfect.
that was awesome, Jenny. Let's do a question about lead scoring. So there's a couple of questions about like best practices for setting up lead scoring. And then there's also another question about like, if you want to set up your lead scoring where you have multiple brands and you want to be able to score by product.
So I haven't done product-based scoring yet, but I can take the first part of the question. So I think I did a presentation at Summit on this too, at Adobe Summit. So definitely maybe we can pop that in the chat here. It's really important when you do lead scoring that you have that partnership with your sales team. So I'd say before you even like start trying to get a scoring model in place, like have those conversations to see, you know, what is high value to them, because that's really going to influence your scoring model. And then I think, you know when you create it, like it's not done. I think we look at our scoring model at least 2 times a year, and sometimes more than that, then kind of make incremental changes to it. When we first started it, opening an email was a big thing. That was 5 years ago. And now we don't even score on that, right? It's so low value to us. And we've added so many other points of contact to our, digital marketing efforts that we can score on more high value things. So I think just kind of know that when you do it the first time, it's not going to be done, and kind of identify those top things, at least initially, that you want to score on. Look at like the low, medium, high value type of points, and kind of break them out into categories from there. And think through, like what your threshold would be, where you would hand it off as an MQL. We've changed ours, I think 2 or 3 times over the process of our lead scoring model. We started it pretty high, we've lowered it, we've moved it up a little bit more again. And now we're kind of at a good place. It's a good volume of leads going through. They're qualified enough for the sales rep to have a conversation, but they're not getting too many. So I think just kind of those conversations with sales leadership are really going to help you. And then you also have that partner on the other side, to hold that team accountable for following up and things like that.
Yeah, I would love to add that we do have product-related scoring, and you actually can find, and I don't want to like self-promote, but like we did a presentation on Adobe, Marketo Summit in 2018, my peer and myself. So basically all kinds of activities are tracked on a program level, and programs have this like specific naming convention where you are like associating like all kinds of activities for this product with like X, Y, and Z in this program name, right? And you have a specific scoring campaign that is watching updates, activities in those specific, like X, Y, and Z name of it. And it gets associated with like, and get incremental score update like in according but it's complicated because now you have to manage it all, and there are like, what if you have multiple products, what if you have like threshold 200 and threshold 100, like depending on score. So like there are lots of like, it's much higher and more complexity. Like I would suggest like only if you are truly feeling like you're ready for that, because it's very easy to get lost in all of it.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's a great point. Like, what are you actually going to do with it once you have that information? And I've seen it where there's a very simple form of implementation for like product scoring, exactly like taking from the naming convention that you have in place for your programs, populating fields with certain numbers. But at the end of the day, how is that translating when it's passed over to sales? How are they taking that information and actually using it to further the conversation, or how are you using it to increase the accuracy of targeting people for for email communication. And I think having summary fields is really useful. So like this, product interest, and then whatever field has like the highest score or has met that threshold at a certain point of time, you just populate that product interest field with that. And then that's what you pass over to sales with the alert to reach out to this person. And then, they could, if you want them to dive a little bit further, look a little bit more into, okay, this is their, my best bet is to talk to them about this product, but looking at their product interest scores, they're also interested in this one and that one as well. So yeah, I definitely think coming from the perspective of what are you actually doing with the information, and then try to make it as simple as possible to start off with. And then of course, yeah, sometimes it just snowballs and you get more complexity added into it. So yeah.
Yeah, to Amanda's point, maybe it's not even about scoring, but like getting the right engagement, right? Like the specific topics. So like maybe it's not about scoring, but like tracking the interests that people are showing up, right? Like with, and like make some kind of either nurture streams associated with that, or some like specific journey that you can build around that. That might be kind of like better approach.
One thing I would just keep in mind, whether you're scoring brands differently or business units differently or products differently, however you translate that to sales or Salesforce, Marketo Sales Insight in the scoring section, it always shows one score, and that's the person score. So however you set up your final scoring model, whether you're just scoring products differently or if your brands or business units have complete separate overall lead scores, keep in mind what that looks like in Sales Insight so you can explain and train correctly for it.
No, all really great answers. Like, follow-up question to that. Like, so we've talked about like this is ultimately getting like the right person to the salesperson at the right time. So a couple questions. How does like how the sales organization is set up influence like how you would set up that scoring? And then kind of a follow-up question to Natalie, like how often do you recalibrate with your sales teams on scoring? Because you mentioned in your answer that you're always kind of refining your scoring. So how often would you recommend that we go back to our sales teams and sharpen the pencil on scoring?
Yeah, so with our partnership with our sales leaders, we still have monthly recurring meetings set up. So I would say whatever that cadence is for you, it really helps you keep a pulse on what's working and what's not. Sometimes we don't need the meetings. Sometimes it's really important depending on what's going on. But it helps you have insight into what they're dealing with. So I think, a year ago when COVID hit and we all kind of shifted gears, like we really turned off our scoring program because our sales team was so like shifting to customer support that it wasn't needed. It wasn't appropriate. I think things like that, if you kind of are in your marketing lens, you wouldn't see things like that or understand that behavior. So I think having that just regular touch base with the sales leadership is really important. As far as formally looking at your process, I think we kind of take a twice a year type of look at things. And most of the time we're not changing score values, but we might be adding in new score points or score, things we're scoring on. So like we're looking at adding some new things in the summer, with new tools we've added in. We have new capabilities that we didn't have before. So I think it's a good chance to just identify those and get them added in. But I think, looking at it a couple of times a year is helpful. Once a year is definitely maybe all you need, depending on how, advanced your program is, but just making sure you kind of calendarize it and are taking a look at it.
Great. Two more questions. So there was a question about preparing for the MCE, especially with the new version of the exam coming out. So are there like practice documents that you'd recommend that they go to, especially if they're studying for the new version of the exam?
Like Amy Goldfine is like the expert on MCE. She's not looking up at the camera right now, but
I wouldn't say I'm an expert at MCE. I definitely have a lot of hot tips about taking it online. I will post a link to a blog post that I wrote about that. If you've never taken it online, I have not taken the new version. I will also post some links to the differences between the two versions, but this is y'all's party, so I'm gonna back off now.
I retook the MCE like the week before the new test rolled out, so I just missed out on it. Has anyone else taken the new one?
No, but I think you can choose which one, right? Yeah, so
Mhm.
you can choose until the end of the year or something like that. I think it's almost the end of the year, October maybe. Um, so yeah, you can take the current one. And there's a lot of information out there on the current one. I think we'll probably have to like tweaks. I think most of that information will probably still carry over. I don't think it's completely testing. It's still Marketo, right? So the Chicago Mug did a series of prep where they went over like topics, how they go over questions, all of that. And I think that series is, yeah, we can probably find the link to that and put it in chat as well. But if you're taking the current one, that is definitely a helpful resource for you.
I think too, Jenny, I know you're off mute, so I don't want to keep talking. Have you taken the new test?
No, I haven't. I haven't taken it yet.
I think what I've heard anecdotally from other people who've taken the new one and people who helped with the new one is that, the previous test was very like in the weeds. I know some of the questions to me felt almost kind of like tricky, like the way they were worded. So really having to like reread the question, understand what they're looking for, things like that. Whereas the new test, I think, is geared more broadly at like more Marketo skills. So like, even if you're not in the admin doing things, understanding what admin settings are, if you don't have it, but being aware of like revenue cycle explorer and what's available there. So it's maybe a little bit more broad across Marketo as opposed to being super focused on like the specifics of like marketing activities or analytics or the database. That's kind of my understanding so far.
For what it's worth, I think I saw somebody ask, would we recommend taking the old one or the new one? I can say, having taken the old one, if you're in Marketo like every day, it is super easy to pass. If you are in Marketo and you know Marketo, it's hard to pass for people who are only in certain parts of Marketo. Like if you're an email designer and you make emails and templates and landing pages and things, it's going to be a hard test for you to pass. But if you're in Marketo every day, the old test is easy peasy. Go take it. Can't speak to the new one though.
Yep. All right, one final question, and this is going to be a personal question for everybody. In what ways has becoming a Marketo champion enhanced your life?
It's not all race here, you guys, to answer the question. I think it's the community, like getting to know all these wonderful people on the call today. We have Slack channels together and happy hours and conversations. I think, just the knowledge that you're surrounded by and just like the awesome people has been like the best part of it, especially with COVID and not being able to go and meet people in person at conferences and things like that. I think it's been a huge help to have the champion community. And I would totally recommend anyone who's interested in diving deeper into the Marketo community. It's definitely an awesome opportunity. The customer team at Marketo is amazing to work with. But yeah, it's definitely the people.
Agree. I think
Agree.
there's
Third.
yeah, right. It's like the connections made are just great. They're awesome. Like you'll never not have uh, a question that goes unanswered. Like it's always going to be answered if you reach out. There are also always going to be multiple job opportunities just because of the network that you build with around like the champion program. you know that like your career is going to have a lot of options. And I think that's really good for where you're at right now too. If you're just looking into getting into the champion program, once you become a champion, you kind of get that recognition. It definitely does very well for just kind of giving you credibility to you know, pitch new ideas at work, get a raise at work, you know, move into just like a higher level of what you're doing. So I think those are the biggest benefits for sure.
Yeah, I would also say that we have an opportunity to submit applications for like speaking. And there are like many more opportunities around like speaking, presenting, like getting to different types of events. And at Summit, when we had in-person Summit, we did have some like, you know, smaller gathering, which is always super helpful. So it is extremely helpful and warm and cozy, and yeah, it's kind of like you're getting suddenly sisters and brothers that you can talk to every time, and it's always awesome.
Not a ton left. You guys covered it all. It's amazing. It's not just a community and a networking, you know, opportunity, but it's almost a family, like a large extended family. Extends beyond the champion program. You see people you meet in the user groups, like Chris. I first met you at the Atlanta Marketo user group, and now he's part of Fearless 50 and the champion program. And it's just, it kind of connects all those Adobe Marketo communities in one place. And it's current champions, alumni champions. It's really like an extended family, and it's amazing. And I can say career rise, I don't think anybody can say it's not a career booster. I know it's definitely boosted my career and helped propel me throughout the years, and I'm very grateful for it.
Oh, thank you so much. I think I can echo all of that. And including those of us who are like at our companies, like we are the go-to person when it comes to Marketo, to like to have this community and this family to bounce ideas off of. Like we have other folks that are in the same kind of career as us, the same position as us, that we can like, we don't necessarily have to know everything in this community. We can bounce ideas off of each other and get sharper. It's really, that's the number one thing I've seen. So thank you all so much for coming in, answering the questions. The recording will be distributed soon, and I hope each of you got a lot of value out of today's discussion. Look forward to the June invite shortly. And again, just with the bevy announcement, please check your spam folders because the bevy system is having issues with getting emails into spam. So just make sure to check there for the materials after the call.